Let's focus on e-commerce, because I think that's what we should be talking about today, because otherwise that would go beyond the scope of today's meetup. Give us some information, the strategic importance of category pages from your point of view. In terms of visibility in the search engines, what is very important when working with category pages? How can I attract traffic through the organic search in Google, for instance, from a website? I want to apologize at the start if there are some interferences. I'm sitting in a park where I'm on a vacation. There is no internet, so my apologies from the start if there were any noises. To your question, for online shops, and we're referring to online stores, marketplaces, etc., category pages are extremely important because they are a strong visibility driver for keyword rankings and for traffic in general. Most of the online stores, and from an SEO perspective, all this is focusing on the category pages because all the generic keywords that there are, if we don't look at the long tail, black Levis shirt with a V cleavage. Let's say we're just speaking about a shirt. That's what I mean by generic. There's a high search volume. We're talking about hundreds of thousands or million queries per month. And this is a stage in which the user doesn't really know what he or she wants. A black shirt, maybe a Levis shirt, but you don't know yet which one. So this brings you to a category page. And here, a category page has to make sure that the user feels well received, and the searching person has to find what he or she is looking for without knowing what that is. It's a kind of a landing page. And there is a mixture. It's a distributor page with different shirts, and the users can select what they are looking for. And certain features are provided with the filtering option so that they can give more details: material, fabric, has it been produced in a sustainable way, etc. So the category page is supposed to do exactly that. On the one hand, it gives orientation to the user in the stage where the user doesn't know what they want. And it's also a distributor page providing the inventory of the store, nicely prepared. And they're also a very important pillar with regard to the information architecture of a website. They give the search engines a much better idea of the taxonomy. Very well. Thank you very much for that first overview. So we are in a very early stage of the purchasing process. That is the orientation stage. I enter a black shirt in Google, as you just said. I am shown the category pages of different companies or provider, and then there's a kind of a funnel that leads me to the product I'm finally interested in. This is how we could summarize it. And you're saying that in this early point, or this early stage, the category pages play a very important role, an early point in the customer journey. And others also know that these pages are very important, strategically speaking. In SEO, what can I do in order to bring about visibility with regard to a keyword like a black shirt or a black Levis shirt? What can I do from your perspective? What are the most important points I have to take into account? Well, let's touch on the best practices, what everybody does and what is important from an SEO perspective. On the one hand, as I said, the category page is very important in the taxonomy. How do I structure a web store? And you start with the home page, and the categories you have are offered to the user. You have a menu, for instance, you select shoes, women's shoes, high heels. And that is one of the best practices with regard to taxonomy. The taxonomy has to be designed in a way that it is meaningful for the user who click their way through from the homepage. So the taxonomy, the structure is super important. There's a rule of thumb that says that within 3 clicks as of the homepage, they have to be able to find the product. So category level 1, level 2, and then the product. There are best practices like at Zalando. Yes, as I said, it's super important to define the category structure well. That's one of the best practices in an online store. The people who come to the page within 3 clicks, category level 1 is shoes, category level 2 is high heels, and then the third category is the product itself. With just 3 clicks, they should arrive. You can structure it in a way that you enter the product category first and then you divide by gender. Or you do as Zalando does, they select the gender first, I'm a man, a woman, or a child, and then they break it down to the individual products. That's super important, is one of the best practices about how a page should or a site should be structured. Second, the URL structure is also part and parcel of the best practices in e-commerce and in SEO. The URL structure should reflect the taxonomy of the site. Let's take Zalando, Zalando.de. That's the first category level. That would be Zalando.de/women's shoes, and category level 2 would be /women's shoes /high heels, for instance. So the taxonomy should be reflected, the taxonomy of the store, of the web shop. And part and parcel of the best practices is also the meta titles and meta descriptions. The page title, for instance, that also focuses on individual product categories. Let's say if I'm on a category page for women's shoes, the page title should also mention that we're talking about women's shoes. And the meta title, particularly in e-commerce, it's also important to have bicycle modifiers and use them. You put the title in a way that you say, now women's shoes, order now, or order now at a good price. And then you mention the name of the shop. Let me give you one example. Buy summer dresses at a favorable price in your store. That would be an example, and you can also read that in the white paper. And then we've got the meta description. That's also one of the best practices. You can give advantages of a product, right to return it within 30 days, delivery or free shipping, etc. All these strong points. At the end, the page title and the meta description, that is the kind of ad that the person sees when searching in Google. And it should be designed in a way that the user knows that they are where they want to be, and B, the text should invite you to click, so that there's a certainty that the user clicks on the result. And then there are the page titles. This also gives an orientation to the user, as well as to the search engine. You arrive at the category page and you see the H1 title, so the largest title at the top. That makes sure that the user sees, well, here we're talking about, this is about women's shoes. And then the menu structure, I mentioned it before, that's also very important and one of the best practices. The homepage menu is positioned in a way that, and designed in a way that all the important categories are mentioned. And the homepage menu, well, there are different opinions with regard to quantity and quality. Do you have to mention all the categories or not? The experts are not speaking in unison here. I think it should be dynamic, depending on the seasonality, for instance. From my perspective, it doesn't make sense to mention snowboard apparel or ski skiing equipment in the menu, but we should focus on the most important categories: bikinis, bathing suits, boards, whatever, and adapt it. Lazy loading of images, but we're not going to dwell on this right now. And the last best practice is the category text. Saim, you wanted to say something? No, we just lost you. And the last thing we heard was you speaking about the menu structure and that it should be dynamic. In summer, we don't want to see winter items necessarily, but rather bikinis or bathing, fashion. And then we lost you for 20 or 30 seconds. But I think we've heard everything. So we're speaking about category text. Now we are touching on a very important point where we're also doing a lot with AX. But before speaking about automation, I would like to know your opinion about category texts. What is important in addition to the text elements? We've already mentioned so the titles and the meta description. Besides that, what is important for the category text, so the content which is visible, if I may call it that way? What is important? Well, it's not always visible. The category texts from an SEO perspective, unfortunately, most of the online stores work with footer texts. What is that? These are texts that if you scroll to the bottom, this is the text you find text, which is important from an SEO perspective. And I'm going to tell you in a moment why it is important, but from a user perspective, it doesn't give any added value. So I actually doubt that more than 20% of the people read these texts, so they are not useful to the reader. But as I said before, it's super important because of an SEO perspective, because they help Google, and tests have shown, and there are many case studies in the industry that have shown that they help Google when it comes to indexing these pages. And this is why everybody does it. And there's one large international furniture store that by coincidence deleted all the footer texts and lost ranking overnight. And then they were wondering what happened. Why did we lose ranking? And it turned out that the category texts were lost or had disappeared. They introduced them again and improved their rating again, their ranking again. And but these texts don't necessarily provide any benefit to the user. And this is why what I want to depict in the white paper is that category pages should be seen and have to be seen as a kind of a sales assistant or sales consultant, because it's in that stage that the user doesn't know yet what they want. The category pages have to be convincing, and you can do that with features in the inventory and also through content. So the content of the category texts, can you give us a hint? How can we help the user? And from your point of view, what would work best in Google, like the content structure? Can you give us a tip or two? I have two specific examples that also appear in the white paper. Kitchens. If you Google kitchens, at first you find Müllmox, they appear there, and they have an excellent category page. And it is structured in a way that the user in the visible segment is shown a selection of different features. Do the users want to plan a kitchen in 3 dimensions? Oh, you're showing it, great. Do the users want to have a 3D kitchen planner, or do they want to have a kitchen configurator? Can you scroll up a bit? Here you see the 3 options, exactly. This is where people can play a bit, or they can already make an appointment online. This is what the user sees first, and then if you scroll down, you see that the user can select more. Do they want to buy online? Do they want to plan a kitchen? Do they want recessed devices? In order to break it down a little further. And then if you scroll down even further, this brings us to the first text. So if all the things you could select at the top, it wasn't what you were looking for, here you see all the things that are possible. The 3D kitchen planner, they explain time and time again how to use this page. And then you can break it down even further, provided a checklist is provided, high value content, and you can also pick and choose if you want to have a prefabricated kitchen or individual elements. The nice thing is that it's not repetitive. It breaks down the information further and further. So what do you want? That's the start. And if this wasn't enough, it's explained again with more content. And if the user then knows what he or she wants, there's another possibility to select. So there's a very nice breakdown of information, which is very helpful to the user. I'm building a house myself. I know that it's really a pain to select kitchens, for instance, if you've never, ever dealt with kitchens before. So it's very good to be assisted well, to be consulted well. And here you see that you're really with the right brand. I just wanted to go over to the second example. Yes, please do so. It's a good idea. And then we can keep going. There's a second example. That's Hornbach, the DIY store. If you scroll down, it's a pool curb at Hornbach. Someone wants to build a pool in the garden, and then there are curb stones you put around the pool. And this is for people who want to build a pool themselves, but it might be something totally new for them. You have to find your way. What material do I use? Do I use wood or plastic or stone, tiles, you name it? And how many do I need? How much material? And if it's, well, we're speaking about a DIY store, so we're assuming that people build themselves, do it themselves. So the information, the assistance is very important. People come to this category page and see the comparison, and they see or can read this guide, this written guide, which describes what material is best. This text gives you information about the best material to use, and there's also a table that has to do with the size of the pool. According to the size of the pool, you need X amount of square meters. And this is very, very useful for the reader, particularly for those who don't know yet how this has to be done. So it's very informative. Usually if you went to a DIY store and you would ask the question, this would be a full consultation. But online you cannot really ask the people, but this content is written very efficiently and helps the user a lot. Takes the people by the hand, so to speak, those people who don't have that much experience yet. Great. I think there are two things that are really important that you just mentioned. The user will like it, you said, and the user will behave differently, will appreciate this content. We didn't say we're writing for Google. No, you're orientating along the lines of the user and not Google. And there's a second thing that I find very impressive, and I use as an image. Imagining a sales conversation, a conversation in the store, in the physical brick-and-mortar store, what would be the guidance I would receive? And this is something that helps me to imagine what would be necessary on category pages or product pages. So these are two very important perspectives that we can have. Let's say we are in the sales process. What would be the ideal scenario, Björn, from a sales assistant perspective? What are the best practices for a sales dialogue? What would be your ideal? I think you mentioned it already very well. The ideal scenario is getting away from the idea to produce something for the search engine. The footer text and the category page text, the footer text usually have that purpose of working well in Google. No, we should focus on the user. Like Mimox, they ask themselves what are relevant questions the user might ask. And this has to be researched, these questions have to be answered, and a category page has to be designed in a way that the most important questions are answered first. Be it with a smart feature like a 3D kitchen planner, or the questions can be answered right away with text content, with pictures that are relevant. So these pages deal with the user more, analyze the user more, and then the page is designed in that way that it gives an answer to the questions the user might have. The user is taken by the hand in that process. That is the most important aspect. And the good thing about it, and the development at Google shows it as well, if you focus on the user and you take the user by the hand and inform the user about the content, Google also likes it. So this means that the work is done for the user, and the side effect is that Google also likes it. Great. And I'm asking our audience, the crowd, so to speak, are there any questions, interests with regard to websites or structure of category pages?
Seht ihr was im Chat? Heike, ihr seid doch im Chat, oder? Seht ihr was im Chat? Heike, ihr seid doch im Chat, oder?
Are there any questions in the chat, Heike? Have we received any questions? So far, no question has been received, but I have a question. But maybe Saim, you will answer it. We'll see. The question I have is, as a good sales consultant, I'm drawing up this content. And the question is, where does the know-how come from? How do I know what the users are looking for? I mean, let's say in a brick-and-mortar store, I can ask questions, and then the shop assistant can answer, can react to my questions. But online, I have to anticipate the questions. I have to anticipate the question the person might ask me. Björn, let's speak about keyword tools and question tools. That's a very good question. Could we address it? Yes, absolutely. I think a first step, you can do as a site operator, is to enter the relevant terms in Google. And Google will reveal many insights and inspiration about the questions the user might have. Let's say kitchen planning, for instance. If you enter that keyword, maybe there are information boxes that Google provides that give an answer to relevant questions. Or the automated fine-tuning of the search. If you enter something in the search field, other relevant questions are suggested. So just enter your relevant keywords in Google and have a look at what the outcome is. You can also use keyword tools. For instance, if you want to buy licenses, there are many different, Systrix, Searchmetrics, SEMrush. There are many different tools you can use to do keyword research. And if you have relevant questions, you can research them at Q&A platforms. There's one tool that's called Answer the Public, and that's for free. You can enter keywords and all the relevant questions are answered. Keyword Chatter, that's also a tool that is for free. You can use to get inspiration. These are tools that you have to use, you have to investigate and research, and you asked about where to get the know-how from. That's super important to have this knowledge in-house, having an SEO manager or content managers or content strategic experts who know how to research the topics. What are the relevant questions that are answered online? What are the topics that the users are interested in? The questions we have to know if, and we have to give an answer to if we want to sell the product. There's a question coming from the chat, Björn. It goes as follows. It's a little technical, and the question is, the filter and category pages are fulfill a certain sales assistant function. What about the number of filters? Is there a maximum or a minimum number of filters on a category page? So what is the right quantity? There's just a car passing by. Give me a second. The right amount. Well, it depends on the product. How much do you have to break it down? Let's stick to fashion. That's a good example. From a user perspective, it really makes sense to structure according to size, price, material, and color to filter. And it always depends on the product, actually. I don't think there is the right number. You cannot ask too much of the user, offering or asking to select too much. So what does make sense? That's the question you have to ask yourself. And that there's a very interesting point for the filtering or funneling possibilities. What do I index at Google? Because there are many fuck-ups at online stores where all the filters are indexed at Google, and later on, you see that was a very risky undertaking, because you produce a lot of duplicate content. The category page, that's one thing. That's one page you could give to the index. And if you then have 120 filter variants you also offer, you are in trouble. So that's one of the best practices as well. I'd advise you to de-index everything unless it makes sense, because it gives you search volume. People are really interested in Google it. Like a black Levis shirt. Black is the filter in conjunction with Levis. I would put that into the filter, but I would de-index the rest. Let me add something, if I may, Björn. The information architecture. There was a rule we had for if you have less than 3 points, you don't need a filter. If it's less than 3, you don't need a filter, and it shouldn't exceed 7. Because from a perception psychology perspective, it's difficult if you have more than 7 filters. I think that's also a very fundamental guideline for orientation we could use. For me, that would mean if I have 3 to 5 filter groups, colors, for instance, I don't want to indicate more than 7. Blue, green, yellow. If I break it down even further, things get tricky. If I ask for more colors as a filter, so that just as an additional aid. Markus is asking a question that's also very exciting, Björn. I like it, but I would also ask you to look at F&A, because questions are also coming in. Oh, I didn't look at that. Thank you. I was just seeing the chat. Okay, I'm just going to tackle the ones in the chat first. There are some others also waiting. And time is speeding. Time is flying. Markus is asking a question. Landing pages instead of if you use both landing pages and category pages, what should you take into account from an SEO perspective? And he also mentions duplicate content, etc. Please be brief, Björn, because we have quite a lot of questions here and the time is advancing fast. In my experience, landing pages make sense whenever, well, categorization is very rigid. So if you want to use keyword variations and want to have landing pages for the different keywords. Fidget spinner. that's new. For instance, it appeared overnight as a new product. This is what you would use a landing page for instead of a category page. And there are other keywords that have to do with category page. iPhone case black, for instance, for the iPhone 12. So in order to be flexible from the point of view of the SEO expert and the website manager, so if you have to react fast to trends, landing pages make sense. And then there are brand pages, and they also work quite well, particularly as a distributor for the internal linking. A link to Adidas, Macintosh, Windows, etc. So these are two things that come to my mind off the cuff. And a follow-up question from the Q&A. It's also about category pages. Category pages, should they be full-fledged pages, or should you rather use special landing pages? So how large can a category page be, and when should I split it and have more specific landing pages to be built for certain aspects on the category page? Well, kitchen, for instance, the most upper category, the first category, I would use that as holistically as possible, as we've seen with the furniture, the kitchen manufacturer, with everything there is, so everything that matches the topic. And then you can think about the different variations. Does it make sense in terms of the taxonomy to have more pages, or to use keyword variations and landing pages? What is important is they all have to be connected. So you need the internal links and references. Referencing is very important as well. One last thing that's also very important. When we're speaking about text, it's very difficult to strike a balance, and the balance is very important. The intention of a category page is a transactional one. I mean, we want the people to buy something, and they want to receive information first. But if you use too much text, let's say if you have more text than you can select products, it's difficult for Google to find out the intent. Is it this rather information-based or transaction-based? So really have to strike a balance here. That's also very important to mention. I think there's another question of the chat by Lisa that matches this topic very well. She sees all that what makes us unhappy. I have a category pages and then a different consultants, and how dangerous is it to provide a link to an external page? Is the user then going to leave? Is the user going to drop out of the funnel? So the risk of losing a user, send the user out of the funnel, and I cannot retrieve the user, so to speak. Well, this risk is there, and what I'm telling you is not a one-size-fits-all solution. And I'm sure that Hornbach also tested at the DIY store. The intention is very important. If the user comes to category page and they see different possibilities, what material do I need? The curbstones, and then if they don't know the advantage of this material and what is the disadvantage of the other material, well, there is a text that explains. You can scroll down again and get the information. And on the information-based guide, there's a link back to the platform as well. So if you have a good link, so you have information and then a link back to the platform, a little information, a link back to the platform. So now the user has received the information, has read it, now the user can go back. And the user doesn't necessarily have to click on this guide, the link that leads to this guide. I mean, if the user knows the information already. This is just for those who need additional information. One last question by Shakir, who in a little provocative asks, why can we give the user more importance over Google, although the user reaches us through Google? So how can we have the search engine rank second after the user? I mean, this is almost screaming for a concluding remark on your part, Björn, because it somehow summarizes what the essence of your presentation. It's a justified question. And if you have a look at the development of Google and where Google wants to get to and the direction Google is pushing the SEO experts into, it's all geared towards having the focus on the user. The search intention, satisfy the search intention, and it's also mentioned in the white paper, the micro moments. Google knows very well the intention of the user and wants to offer relevant content that satisfies this need. And you have to put the user first, because only that way can you satisfy this intention. And if you do that well, you see that with Hornbach, for instance, they're ranking first for important keywords with a high search volume. And they rank so well because they satisfy the user's intention. From my perspective, from an SEO perspective, I would always focus on the user and focus on the search engine second. Because at the end of the day, what you want to do is to sell. I mean, it's of no use if you satisfy Google, but then the user doesn't find what they're looking for on your website. And you still don't know how to buy a kitchen at the end. Björn, thank you so much for this great concluding remark. At the end, we want to sell something on e-commerce pages, and category pages are very important in this customer journey. The user orientation as well. I'm sure we've been able to give you some strategic tips about what is important on the category pages. The white paper will be sent to all the registered visitors tomorrow.